I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. All right. Happy Sunday, guys. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you're new, I don't know why I'm in silly mood today. If you're new, I want to let you know that Sabby Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And you can catch me here Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Twitter. And I want to go ahead and give a shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. You're out here doing the damn thing. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course, the ultimate. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen. And I want to give a quick shout out to a new Sabby patron. Thank you so much for your support, Stacy Banta. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for Stacy. All right. So, pretty interesting show. We are going to do call-in today after the show, so we'll have an earlier call-in. I know some of you have requested that. I can do call-in for probably about an hour and a half, and then I have a meeting after that. But I would love to hear from you guys since we didn't get a chance to do it on Thursday. But I want to start off with this cold open here. I was going to actually start with this earlier in the stream. Oh, this is not where it should be. 1 second. 437. Okay, yeah. We're going to start off with this cold open, and then I'm going to tell you about the stories we're going to talk about today. But I think I want you to see this first because it is relevant to one of the stories we're discussing today. I just want to jog your memory.
That goes on when we talk about crime. Crime is not Democrat or Republican. Making the streets safe is not a Democratic or Republican issue. This is one of those issues I hope this passage of this bill will be taken out of the gridlock category and moved into an emerging consensus. And the consensus is as follows, and I will cease when I finish this statement. The consensus is A, we must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask, what made them do this? They must be taken off the street.
That was President Joe Biden when he was a senator. And I know I've played that clip on the show before, but today it is even more relevant considering the decision that Joe Biden has made in reference to a new crime law in D.C. So I wanted to jog your memory to remind you of what Joe Biden said back then and how he still feels apparently about crime today and mandatory sentences. So what else are we going to discuss today? Let me go ahead and show that thumbnail to you here. Boop, 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 boop. Interesting stories today. Today, we are going to discuss Joe Biden backs GOP crime law. Yes, he is actually doing that, and Democrats are not happy about it. We're going to get into that story. I'm also going to discuss Alex Murdaugh guilty. If you have not heard about this case, you are going to hear about it today. This is actually a huge story. So the fact that someone as wealthy as Alex Murdaugh has been found guilty speaks volumes, especially for those who live in low country South Carolina. I'm going to tell you about that area as well. We're also going to discuss Kshama Sawant launches workers strike back. That's Kshama there with Nick. That happened yesterday. I'm going to get into that. I'm really excited about it. And I'll tell you about the plans for the Boston chapter launch, which is coming up as well. And we're also going to we're also going to cover Missouri ballot initiative wins. So those are the things we're going to start off with today. All right, let's go ahead and get started with Missouri BI wins. I'm going to cover 2 of these today, and then I'll do 2 on Tuesday. Also, FYI, Margaret Kimberly will be here with me Tuesday night. We have a lot to discuss, so stay tuned for that. Missouri, interesting state. Citizens of Missouri may initiate legislation as either a state statute or a constitutional amendment, both through the process of direct initiative, meaning successful petitions bypass the Missouri legislature and go directly on the ballot for voters to vote on. In Missouri, citizens also have the power to repeal legislation via veto referendum. The Missouri General Assembly may also place measures on the ballot as legislatively referred constitutional amendments or legislative referred state statutes with a majority vote. I want to highlight the single subject rule in Missouri. Missouri has a single subject rule for all ballot measures. In addition, the rule limits the number of sections of the Constitution an amendment may revise. It states petitions for constitutional amendments shall not contain more than one amended and revised article of this Constitution, or one new article which shall not contain more than one subject and matters properly connected therewith. So let's move on to the first ballot measure here for Missouri. And for those who are not aware, a single subject means that they can't have a ballot measure that has more than one subject. So you can't combine 2 measures. You can only have one measure. So that's important to note. The first one is Missouri Amendment 1, State Treasurer Investment Authority Amendment. A yes vote supported this constitutional amendment to allow the state treasurer to invest state funds in highly rated municipal securities and to authorize the state legislature to pass laws allowing the treasurer to invest in other reasonable and prudent financial instruments and securities. This measure did not pass. It failed by 54.32%. So this one was defeated. The ballot title for the measure was as follows: do you want to amend the Missouri Constitution to allow the General Assembly to override the current constitutional restrictions of state investments by the state treasurer and allow state investments in municipal securities possessing one of the top 5 highest long-term ratings or highest short-term rating? State governmental entities estimate no cost and increase interest revenue of $2 million per year. Local government entities estimate no cost and increased interest revenue of at least $34,000 per year. Who supported this? State Treasurer Scott Fitzpatrick, who is Republican. Here's his argument. It would allow the treasurer's office to invest in municipal securities. It would also give the General Assembly the power to add to the current investment options by passing a statute. He said what prompted his office to pursue the amendment was the huge influx of cash from tax revenue and pandemic stimulus money from the federal government and the lowest interest rate environment. Now, I want to remind you here, this was actually a measure to amend the Missouri Constitution. So there are different ways that you can do these ballot measures. You can amend your state's constitution, or you can leave it up to the voters to decide if they want to add a measure. So, for example, when we legalized marijuana in Massachusetts, that was not an amending of the Constitution. That was left up to the voters to decide whether or not we actually wanted to legalize that here in Massachusetts. So there's two different ways that this can be done. So I just wanted to reference that so there's no confusion there. Who opposed it? Apparently, no one. When you want to look at campaign finance money put towards this measure, there was no money to support it or oppose it. So that's that on that one. Now, Roger Meadows put a little bit of commentary here. It says, funny how the state treasurer was the only one for this with no opposition except for the opposition that mattered, the voters. Dude, if you wanted more money invested into the state to bring in more revenue, you should have got Missouri lawmakers to do a citizen battle initiative. And come on, guess, Sabrina, what? Yeah, there was other ways that this could have been done. Now, here's one of the ones. This one is probably the most popular ballot measure for Missouri this year. And that is Missouri Amendment number 3, Marijuana Legalization Initiative. That's right. You heard it, folks. A yes vote supported amending the Missouri Constitution to legalize the purchase, possession, consumption, use, delivery, manufacture, and sale of marijuana for personal use for adults over the age of 21. Allow individuals with certain marijuana-related offenses to petition for release from prison or parole and probation and have their records expunged, and enact a 6% tax on retail price of recreation marijuana. This second piece right here, allow individuals with certain marijuana related offenses to petition for release from prison or parole and have their records expunged. This is the piece that was missing from this measure in Massachusetts. This is one of the criticisms that people here still have in reference to under Governor Baker's administration was the call to release the prisoners who have marijuana convictions. So that piece has not happened yet. So yeah, that's unfortunate. But notice that Missouri actually had that as a part of their ballot measure. Now, I don't know if anyone has been released yet. It may be some time before that happens, but at least they put it in the ballot measure. So I think that piece is crucial. Now, it did pass. It passed by 53.10%. And I'm actually surprised it was that low because this is one of these, I would say one of these policies where it does cross partisan lines, where you have Democrats and you have Republicans that do agree that marijuana should just be legalized now at this point. So I am really surprised that it passed, but that was a low percentage there. I would have imagined more people would have voted in support of that. So I'm surprised by that one. But I also don't live in Missouri. So it says, what was the status of marijuana in Missouri before the election? Medical marijuana was legalized in Missouri when voters approved of Amendment 2 in 2018. Amendment 2 legalized marijuana for medical purposes, taxed marijuana sales at 4%, and required tax revenue to be spent on healthcare services for veterans. Prior to 2018, medical marijuana was not legalized for use or possession in Missouri. Prior to 2022 election, for recreational marijuana, the possession of 10 grams or less of cannabis was decriminalized. Possession of 10 grams or less was punishable by a fine only, but the offense remained a criminal misdemeanor prior to the 2022 election. Recreational marijuana was not legal in Missouri. So what was the status of recreational marijuana in the United States? Going into the election, 19 states and Washington, D.C. had legalized the possession and personal use of marijuana for recreational purposes. In 11 states and DC, the ballot initiative process was used to legalize marijuana. In one state, the legislator referred a measure to the ballot for voter approval. In 7 states, bills to legalize marijuana were enacted into law. This is another one of those progressive policies that actually is not happening on the national level when we talk about national politics, but it is winning in the states. Now, of course, there were people who supported and people who opposed this measure. Who supported it? Get this, State Representative Nick Schroyer, who is a Republican, and Kansas City Mayor Quentin Lucas, both of them supported it. Now, I'm not sure if Kansas City Mayor is a Democrat or not, but I would imagine he probably is. I think Kansas City is more so blue. Unions, AFL-CIO, SEIU, Missouri/Kansas State Council. Some of the organizations that approved of it, Empower Missouri, ACLU of Missouri, Mizzou College Democrats, NAACP Columbia, Northwest Missouri Normal. Those are some of the organizations that approved of it. Here was an argument for it. Recent polling reveals that a majority of Missouri residents are ready and eager to end their state's failed marijuana prohibition. That is because Missourians, like the overwhelming majority of Americans, recognize that prohibition is a disastrous and draconian practice best cast into a waste bin of history. Voters in the Show Me state want a sensible policy of legalization and regulation. And that is why we expect that they will overwhelmingly vote yes on this initiative this fall. But they didn't overwhelmingly vote yes. That's the surprising part. That's what I don't understand. If anyone is in the chat and you're in Missouri, tell me why you think this went the way that it did. Because 53.10% is not overwhelmingly supporting it, in my opinion. But it did pass. So who opposed it? Opposition, Governor Mike Parson, State Representative Ashley Bland Manlove, St. Louis Mayor Tashara Jones, who is nonpartisan, interesting, Missouri Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft. So again, you have bipartisan support to oppose it. You have Republicans and you have Democrats and you have a mayor who was nonpartisan that got together and opposed this measure. So that says a lot. Organizations, Missouri Catholic Conference, Missouri NAACP, interesting. It's interesting how this went. Here's one of the arguments from State Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft. I don't think that this amendment is good for the state. It's way too much to put in our Constitution. If you think that marijuana should be decriminalized under the state law, the amendment should say something to the effect of the recreational use of marijuana in the state of Missouri is not unconstitutional and may be regulated by general statute. It seems like people seem to have an issue with the language of the ballot measure. That's what it seems like. Now, I want to highlight this piece here because there was campaign finance money spent in reference to this measure. Over $8 million was spent to support it, and zero was spent to oppose it. That's really interesting. Now, there's another piece I want to highlight here that Roger Meadows highlighted for me. And you guys can look at this as well. We can put this in the chat so you can see all of this. This is a lot of like legal jargon here, but this piece right here. Sabs, please read this commentary. I know it is wordy. Let us remember this was an initiative amendment put forth by Missourians, not the legislator. You have to respect the time that was taken into crafting this initiative. You would have sworn from all those words above that it was written by the legislator. However, there is one thing they didn't do. Now that ordinary people can profit from cannabis, the conundrum, they fall into it's still illegal federally. This is an important piece. Yes, even though this has passed in some of the states, federally, it's still illegal. meaning their profits cannot be put into banks because their banks are FDIC, which means they have to abide by federal banking regulations. So they're forced to keep profits on site, making them susceptible to armed robberies, putting them in danger. This is why a public bank is so important, because it allows for community banks and credit unions a safe place to deposit profits made from the cannabis industry without running afoul of the federal banking regulations. This is because public banks act as a replacement insurer for the FDIC, acting as an SDIC instead, thus providing the banking environment needed to bank cannabis profits with your local community bank or credit union. Yes, y'all, public banks are legal money launderers. Very good points there mentioned by Roger Meadows. I think that is something that needs to be pointed out. And yeah, it does put them at the risk for armed robberies, to be honest. If you're keeping that cash like on site, it'll be interesting to see what happens. It'll be interesting to see. But that's 1 and 2 for Missouri. I'll pick up the other 2 Tuesday evening. All right. If you haven't had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button, guys. That helps me out with the algorithm. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to a couple of comments here, and then we're going to get to the next story, which is freaking crazy. Freaking crazy. I kid you not. Bizarro Joe says, hell yeah, that's what I thought. We need to get the dispensaries on board for public banking. That's right. That's right. Child of God said they can put it in Bitcoin using the Strike network. Everyone should already know this. Interesting. P Stuff says federally legalize cannabis now. I know, it's just, I don't think it's going to happen on the national level, just because there's so much money to be made there when it comes to the policing community. Because a lot of police, what do? This is what they do. They pull over people and they arrest people for marijuana convictions. That's where they get a lot of the drug convictions from. Johnny says Federal Reserve dictates bank policy across the U.S. We really have to free ourselves from the central banking industry. We really do. James says, is a for-profit slavery system. Oh, it's connected to this one. James says, because many prisoners are there for weed, it is a for-profit slavery system. There you go. There you go. Law says they cannot make credit charges, but cash deposits are allowed. Roger, you are a little off on your information. Interesting. We'll have to look into that. Okay. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric, and then we'll get to the next story. Yeah, Danny, agreed, Sabs. Why have Federal Reserve in addition to the Treasury? These are all good questions. These are all good questions. Corey says, dismantle the cartels, legalize all drugs, market is gone. There you go. There you go. Marvin, Fed Reserve is owned by the banks. They aren't really part of the U.S. government. You guys have a lot of opinion on this with the banking. Interesting. Okay, let me know when you have the Rockfin comments, Eric, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next story. All right, so this story, okay. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Hey, Sabs, on the first Missouri Amendment, you were supposed to say Missouri public banks. Also, states like Missouri, for the longest, I have been trying to figure out why the state legislature would even want to even bother with a legislative referred state statute when they can pass themselves. Then it occurred to me, perhaps if they fear governor would or has in the past vetoed it. So they want to bypass him and take it to the people. There you go. All right. If you have not heard this story about Alex Murdaugh, you're about to hear it now because this is a crazy story. The documentary is already posted on Netflix. It's 3 episodes. Take a look at it if you get a chance after you see this segment today. Low country, South Carolina. Now, I went to college in South Carolina. I want to explain to you what that means because some people hear this and they're like, what the heck is low country? Low country, South Carolina is actually an area in South Carolina. It's divided into 4 different sections, so to speak. Low country is the area that is southeast-ish of South Carolina. It includes Charleston. It includes Beaufort, other different towns as well. And that is exactly where this tragedy took place, in Low Country, South Carolina. Now, I want to give you an overview of that first geographically so you understand where this all happened. Here's a map of South Carolina. I don't know why this is auto playing. Here's a map of South Carolina here. I'm going to mute it because we don't need the music. So you have 4 different regions here. And they're going to go ahead and identify them for you. So let's go ahead and play. That's the upstate. So that's actually where Spartanburg is there. Greenville is there. So if you ever been to South Carolina or you know someone from South Carolina and you hear them say the term, oh, yes, so-and-so's from upstate, they're not talking about upstate New York. Like that threw me when I first moved to South Carolina because I just thought people were talking about upstate New York because that was the only upstate I ever knew of. And by the way, if you live in New York City, everything's upstate. It's just FYI, everything is upstate. People say upstate, but upstate, that's that region of South Carolina. And then we'll go on to the others. And this is exactly where I stayed. So I lived in, I don't know why this is, what happened here? This thing is so annoying. 1 second, guys. Is this the same? Okay, there we go. Let's try this again. Okay, so upstate South Carolina. And then you have the Midlands. So that's where I went to college, in Richland County right here. That's where the University of South Carolina is located. So I lived in the Midlands portion of South Carolina, right in the middle of the state. It's hot, it's humid, not a lot of breeze. And then you have Petey, South Carolina, which I don't know anything about, to be honest. I haven't really been in that area, to be honest with you. And this is low country. So when you hear people refer of low country, South Carolina, this is the area that they are speaking of. You have Charleston over here on the right. And then you have this county here called Hampton. And that is actually where this tragedy took place. Hampton, South Carolina. Low country is a little bit more old fashioned. They do have their own dish there called the low country broil. That's actually a big thing there. It's actually really good too. But it's a different place. If you leave Columbia, South Carolina, which is the capital of South Carolina, and you go to low country, it's almost, sometimes it feels like you took a step back in time because the towns are smaller. Everybody kind of knows each other. There's a lot of history there in reference to slavery. There's still plantations there in low country, South Carolina. But that's where this incident took place in reference to Alex Murdaugh. Now, I want to start with, give me 1 second. I want to go ahead and start with the incident that happened with Alex's son, Paul Murdaugh. So if you have not heard about this family, they are a wealthy family in Hampton County, South Carolina, in the Low Country. They come from a family of lawyers. So they pretty much have the most money in the town. Everybody knows them. They pretty much own the courthouse. They pretty much for a long time owned the judges. They were able to get away with things that other people would not be able to get away with just because they had money. Before Alex Murdaugh was arrested, his son was arrested. This whole thing is connected. So I want to mention the story about Paul Murdaugh first, who was his son. This is too big. So let's get into this. The father of the young woman killed by Alex Murdaugh's son, drunken boating crash, reportedly snubbed the once powerful South Carolina legal family in court Friday before declaring justice had been served. Now, what are they referring to? Father of Paul Murdaugh, boat crash victim Mallory Beach, justice has been served. So what you have to understand is that there was an incident with Paul Murdaugh, who is the son of Alex Murdaugh, when he was just a teenager. It was him, his girlfriend, and their friends. They had been drinking. Paul Murdaugh decided this would be a good time for him to drive his boat, which was actually a bad idea. You should not drink and drive. You should not boat and drive. Even when his friends tried to tell him not to drive the boat, he persisted with driving the boat. And apparently he got violent with some of his own friends while he was on the boat. As a result, the boat crashed, and one of his friends, Mallory, was thrown off of the boat. She suffered head trauma and she drowned and died. So I have to tell you about that incident so that you understand why Alex Murdaugh was even involved to begin with. So that incident happened. So let's get into that first, and then we'll dive into more details. It says Philip Beach, whose daughter Mallory was killed when Murdaugh's son Paul crashed the boat he was driving in 2019, watched from the back of the courtroom Friday as Murdaugh was handed down 2 life sentences. We're going to get into that. When Murdaugh's brother, John Marvin, approached him to shake his hand after the hearing, he refused, replying, "I have nothing to say to you." Asked by reporters outside court how he felt about Murdaugh's life sentence verdict, Beach replied, "I am grateful. That is Mallory's father, the girl that died. Justice has been served," he said. Here is a picture of that boat. This was the boat that the teenagers were on that night that crashed into the pier, which caused the death of Mallory. Beach declined to comment on whether he believed Murdaugh should have received the death sentence. So let's go back to what happened that night in 2019. Paul was highly intoxicated and belligerent when he crashed a boat carrying 20-year-old Mallory and 5 other young folks near Paris Island, according to law enforcement. Here is a picture here of Mallory and her boyfriend. Both of them were there on the boat. And here is a picture here of Paul. Now, what you have to understand is that Paul's family apparently, and you can watch the documentary and see this as well, they were totally fine with their children drinking. They drank with their children. This is when they were in high school. They drank with their children. But apparently, according to the friends, Paul tended to have an abusive relationship with alcohol. An abusive relationship. And apparently funneling beer, binge drinking. His parents were all aware of this. So that part was not a secret. There were other times when he got into car accidents and his parents covered it up so that he wouldn't get in trouble for drinking and driving. This is what happens when you have a lot of money. The reason why I'm telling you this is because there was already an issue with the drinking. The parents did not put a stop to it. And that same behavior that he had with alcohol ended up causing Mallory her life. Let's go on. All 6 youths were thrown from the boat, but only Mallory did not make it to shore. Her body was found a week later. And I got to say something about that too. In reference to her body being found a week later. First of all, it took hours before her parents were even notified that she was missing. The Murdaugh family went to the scene of the crime before the police did. Why was that allowed? Because they had money, because they were a law family. So they had connections and they were able to cover things up. Alex Murdaugh was given 2 life terms for murders of his wife and of his son. That happened after this incident on the boat. So Alex Murdaugh, who was the father of Paul Murdaugh, later on murdered his wife and his son. Can't make this up. Can't make it up. Now, let's go on. Beach's snub came as photos of Murdaugh dressed in a Confederate military uniform at the University of South Carolina emerged on Friday. So here's a picture here of Alex Murdaugh. That's them. There's the sheriff there. Notice he's in handcuffs. Very, very sad. Very, very sad. I'm going to give you a summary video here too, so you can see more. That's right, James. Wow, it got worse. Oh, it gets really worse. Really worse. Murdaugh was found guilty Thursday of killing his wife, Maggie, who was 52, and son, Paul, who was 22, in a bloody 2021 slaying, which the prosecution says was motivated by his greed stemming from a drug addiction and his desperation to delay getting caught for a string of financial misdeeds tied to his legal practice. We're going to get into a summary here about all this that happened because there's more to add. What you have to understand is that his son, Paul, had already been arrested. Once they were able to connect that, Paul was the one driving the boat. Paul lied when he was questioned by police and tried to blame it on one of his friends, his friend Connor. He tried to say that Connor was driving the boat. But when the structural engineers evaluated the case, they were able to prove that there was no way that his friend Connor was driving the boat because of where Connor was positioned at the time when he was thrown from the boat. That's how they were able to connect it back to Paul. So once they made that connection, Paul was arrested. There was a hearing. And during that time was when Alex Murdaugh killed his son, Paul, and his wife. Let's get into the summary. When I say it's crazy, it's crazy.
Watching the news, you've probably seen pictures of this man. His name is Alex Murdaugh, and he was once a successful attorney in South Carolina. Alex Murdaugh was just indicted for the murder of his wife and son, Margaret Maggie Murdaugh and Paul Murdaugh. The two were found shot dead in their South Carolina home in 2021.
Let's go back.
Alex Murdaugh. Sounds wild already, right? Well, the two alleged murders aren't even half the story. The seemingly unsuspecting wealthy South Carolina family has been involved in more controversy than you can imagine. From the mysterious death of a housekeeper to a boating incident that left a 19-year-old college student dead, there are few things this family hasn't been accused of. So let's take it back to the beginning. The Murdaugh family has been practicing law since the early 1900s. The family served as solicitors, i.e. expert lawyers that provide legal advice for the 14th Judicial Circuit in Beaufort, South Carolina for more than 86 years. Things started to go downhill for the prestigious family after one of Alex Murdaugh's sons, Paul Murdaugh, crashed a boat, killing a 19-year-old. In February of 2019, then 19-year-old Paul Murdaugh took his family's boat out with 5 of his friends. According to investigators, the group was drinking. Hospital staff reported Paul's BAC was 0.24, 3 times.
And if you notice, if I want to show you here, just this image here, that's actually Paul at the register buying alcohol. He was underage at the time. What he did was he used his older brother's ID to buy alcohol. So there were a number of things that were happening here.
The group was drinking. Hospital staff reported Paul's BAC was 0.24, 3 times the legal limit. At around 2 a.m., 911 operators received a call regarding a boat crash. One of the 6 teens, Mallory Beach, was nowhere to be found until 8 days later when her body turned up. Now, here's where things get fishy. According to multiple witnesses who were at the hospital after the accident, Alex Murdaugh was trying to enter the hospital rooms of each friend in an attempt to speak to them. A security guard at the hospital said he heard Alex say, "She's gone, don't worry," while on the phone. 1 month after the crash, Mallory's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit. Weeks later, on what would have been Mallory's 20th birthday, Paul was arrested and charged with causing serious bodily injury and boating while drunk, resulting in death. Unsurprisingly, he pleaded not guilty. 2 months later, he was released on a $50,000 bond. Unfortunately, Mallory's family wasn't able to bring Paul to justice because he was later killed. The suspect, his own father. 2 years later, on June 7, 2021, 911 operators got a call regarding 2 people who were shot at a residence in Islandton, South Carolina. The caller, Alex Murdaugh. He was reporting that his wife and son were shot to death. At the time, cops had no suspect or motive. But Alex, he was only getting started. 3 months later, on September 4th, news broke that Alex had been shot in the head by an unknown man, but survived. According to his attorney, it happened while he was changing a tire. It was immediately considered an attempted murder, but in true Murdaugh fashion, the story took a turn. On September 15th, authorities came forward claiming that Alex tried to arrange his own death in order to give his surviving son, Buster, his $10 million life insurance policy.
Let's interject here. Let's jump in here. I know Gamer said crazy as fuck. I know this story is insane, but let's jump in here for a second in reference to the claim that he was shot in the head by someone. He paid a guy to do it, to make it look like he was shot in the head. He paid a guy to do it, but it turns out that he did it himself. Like, when I say this is crazy, this story is absolutely insane. And we haven't even heard all of it yet. Why would he do that? Well, apparently, Alex Murdaugh was stealing money from his own clients. Now, remember, he was a lawyer. He had a law firm. Goes back into his family, like, decades. So a whole generation of lawyers, the family. Like I said, they had control of the judges as well, but not this one. Not this one who was over this case. So he was stealing money from his clients. And you wonder, why would he do that if he was a part of a wealthy family and they had all this money? Well, apparently he did have an addiction issue. Apparently he was addicted to painkillers. That was another thing that was known to some of Paul's friends, that his dad did have that issue. So I don't know how in deep he was in reference to that, but he was stealing money from his own clients. And all of this just leads back to him. The death of his wife, the death of his son. That's how desperate he was. It's sad. It's crazy.
Alex allegedly employed this man, Curtis Edward Smith. According to Smith's affidavit, Alex instructed him to shoot him in the head and even gave him a gun. Alex's team tried to push out a story saying that he wasn't in his right mind due to drug addiction following the death of his wife and son, and that the failed plot was an attempt to take care of his only surviving son. 1 day later, he turned himself in. His charges included insurance fraud and falsifying a police report.
Notice when he turned himself in, the charges were insurance fraud and falsifying a police report. The false police report was when he claimed that that gentleman shot him in the head, when it turns out he actually shot himself. Obviously, the embezzlement issue there, stealing money from his own clients. So that is originally why he was booked. He was not originally booked for the death of his wife and his son. But it goes on.
We wish we could say the story ended here, but it doesn't. While Alex continued his fall from grace, officials relaunched an investigation into the death of Gloria Satterfield, the Murdaugh's housekeeper who died in 2018 due to what was reported as a trip and fall accident.
So when I tell you there's a lot here, there's a lot here. After he was booked, they started to look into other things in reference to this family and realized people just seem to die around them. Or people just seem to go missing around this family. And they came across a situation with their former housekeeper who supposedly fell down the stairs because she tripped over the dogs. You go on to find out that after she passed away, there was no coroner report because there was no autopsy done. Make it make sense. When have you heard this happening before? No autopsy done? This also goes into the issue of his insurance fraud. Wait for it. Wait for it. I know. Someone just said this is wild. Whereas I forgot who. Oh, Ryan, this is wild. It is. I know. This is the craziest story.
According to a civil lawsuit from Gloria's sons, the family hadn't received a penny from an insurance payout in connection to her death. See, after her death, Alex Murdaugh himself told her sons to sue him, the attorney he suggested they use, his college roommate and godfather of his sons, attorney Corey Fleming.
Let's go back and hear this one again. This piece is very important in reference to the housekeeper.
From Gloria's sons, the family hadn't received a penny from an insurance payout in connection to her death. See, after her death, Alex Murdaugh himself told her sons to sue him, the attorney he suggested they use, his college roommate and godfather of his sons, attorney Corey Fleming.
So Alex Murdaugh, after the housekeeper died, her family did not receive any insurance money. Nothing. After she died. And to add on top of that, like I told you, there was no autopsy of this woman. No autopsy. So he calls up a lawyer here who just happens to be his friend. Let's go back to this picture. He calls up his college roommate and godfather of his sons, attorney Corey Fleming. So he tells her family to just sue him instead because she died on his property. Oh, just don't worry about it. Just go ahead and sue me. And then, of course, he chooses the attorney that they need to work with. Let's go on.
Roommate and godfather of his sons, attorney Corey Fleming. Alex's insurance company agreed to pay the family more than $505,000. But what happened to the money? According to Gloria Satterfield's family, Alex pocketed the money himself. That led to his arrest.
There you go. Let's hear this piece again. Again, keep in mind, this family is already rich. They're already wealthy. So you got to ask, why do they need all this money?
Family more than $505,000. But what happened to the money?
So it says Alex's insurance company paid the family over $500,000. But Gloria's family, and Gloria's the housekeeper, they never got that money. They never got the money because Alex pocketed the money. Hence why he picked the attorney. Let's go on.
According to Gloria Satterfield's family, Alex pocketed the money himself. That led to his arrest on October 14th, 2021, and finally we see some justice being served. Murdaugh was charged with misappropriating insurance settlement funds in the death of Gloria Satterfield. In June 2022, investigators announced that they would exhume Satterfield's body after a coroner told officials that they found inconsistencies surrounding her death. But they didn't actually say when that would happen. We're still waiting. And oddly enough, there wasn't even an autopsy performed.
I've never heard of this before in my life. No autopsy performed. And again, you have to understand, this is a small town. Everybody knows everybody. And everybody damn sure knows who the Murdaughs are because they're the wealthiest family. Like, they own acres and acres of land. They have generations of wealth in their family. And because they have so much money, they were able to get away with murder. They got away with murdering that woman for years. For years. Let's go on.
Meanwhile, the charges against Murdaugh just kept coming. From November 2021 to June of this year, Alex Murdaugh was hit with more than 80 total charges, including financial misconduct and computer crimes. And that brings us to today. Well, sort of. That brings us to July 14th. That was the day Alex Murdaugh was indicted for the murder of his wife and son.
Now, what you have to understand about the murder of his wife and his son, he pled not guilty. He was actually the one that made the phone call to 911 to let them know that someone murdered his wife and someone murdered his son. He made that call. He claimed that he was not on the property at the time that happened. He got home and saw them there and they were already murdered. Now, here's the problem. Apparently, the weapon that was used to kill his son and his wife is a high velocity gun. I don't know as much about guns, but apparently those particular machine guns, so to speak, they can leave off a high velocity residue. And that residue got onto his shirt. And so his story did not add up. If he said that he wasn't there at the time that they were killed, he got home and saw that they were killed. How does he have the residue from the same gun that was used to kill them on his t-shirt? Thank you, Danny. High velocity equals rifle, Sabby. Thank you. I told you I don't know about guns, but isn't that crazy? Now, why am I bringing this story up? Because just the other day, he was finally sentenced. Let me make sure this is where let me check this video because this is not at the, let's see, timestamp 2:32. Okay. Let me go back because I want you to see his reaction to the sentencing. Here we go. Here we are years later.
This is Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for murder, SC Code 16-3-0010, CDR Code 0116. You want me to turn it over? Okay. Guilty verdict. Signed by the forelady, 3/2/23. Docket number 2022-GS-15-00593, the State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, in the Court of General Sessions, the July term of 2022. The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for murder, SC Code 16-3-0010, CDR Code 0116. Verdict, guilty. Signed by the forelady. Date 3/2/23. Docket number 2022-GS-15-00595. The State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, Court of General Sessions, July term 2022. The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. SC Code -16-23-0490, CDR Code 0549, verdict guilty, signed by the foreperson of the jury, date 3/2/23. Docket number 2022 GS-15-00594, the State of South Carolina, County of Colleton, Court of General Sessions, July term 2022. The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. SC Code 16-23-0490, CDR Code 0549, verdict guilty. Signed by the foreperson of the jury, 3/2/23.
Thank you. Madam Forelady and members of the jury, if that is the verdict of each and every juror, please let it be known by raising your right hands. All right, thank you. Any individual polling requested? All right, Madam Clerk, you'll need to individually poll the jury according to their juror numbers.
Number 193.
Let's go ahead and move forward a little bit here. These things are so slow sometimes. I'm like, just get to the point. Okay.
We've been here now 28 days, first few days of jury selection, and the remainder receiving testimony, an overwhelming amount of testimony and evidence that was presented to the jury for the jury's consideration. As I indicated to the jury during the jury charge, or the charge on the law, that this was a matter solely for the jury to determine. The court found at the end of the state's case that there's sufficient evidence to find the defendant guilty if the evidence was believed by the jury. Likewise, at the end of the defense's case, when the motion was renewed, the court found that the evidence was sufficient for the jury to find the defendant guilty. The jury has now considered the evidence for a significant period of time, and the evidence of guilt is overwhelming, and I deny the motion. Mr. Murdaugh.
I'm so sorry, but it's people talk a lot slower there, you guys. We'll play this piece, and then I want to show you what the prosecutor said about Alex Murdaugh.
You now, having been found guilty of 2 counts of murder involving your wife and your son, 2 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime, the burden now comes upon the court to impose a sentence. Given the lateness of the hour and the victim's rights that must be taken into consideration and complied with under the Victim's Bill of Rights, and consider what I would anticipate to be a number of people who might have something to say regarding sentencing, we will defer sentencing to a later date. Of course, the minimum sentence for murder is 30 years. The maximum sentence is life imprisonment as to each count. And on the weapons charge, the sentence is up to 5 years, or 5 years, which has to be concurrent if a life sentence is imposed.
That's Alex Murdaugh.
Okay, so yes, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Let's remember again, he pled not guilty. But I'm going to show you what the prosecutors had to say, because I think this piece is important to hear. Because of course, like, yeah, someone can say that they're not guilty or whatever, but the evidence is pretty damning. The evidence is pretty damning. Let's go ahead and pull up this clip here. Here we go.
Tonight, the once prominent South Carolina attorney Alex Murdaugh back in the courtroom yet again, unshackled to prevent bias, wearing a sports coat, spectacles, and a new head of hair since his last appearance. He faces murder charges for killing his wife Maggie and son Paul, and his attorneys want to know what evidence the prosecution will bring to trial.
The reason that we had asked for a bill of particulars is because, as Your Honor knows, that character evidence, evidence of bad acts, other criminal conduct is not admissible in a criminal trial.
The Bill of Particulars, a common defense tactic, according to legal analysts, to feel out where the state might be going with its case, with 1.2 million pages of government documents.
This is commonly called by defense attorneys haystacking, when the prosecution dumps terabytes of data and documents on the defense, and the defense has to look through it for that proverbial needle in the haystack.
South Carolina prosecutors, nonetheless, painting a picture of why they think Murdaugh might have done the unthinkable. The scion of a prominent family, about to be exposed, they said, for years of financial crimes.
This is an unbroken chain of constant lies and misappropriations and thefts that has been going on for so long. A hamster wheel on which this man has been on constantly, having to borrow to steal millions of dollars.
Murdaugh was charged by a grand jury in July, more than a year after the murders occurred, and he's pleaded
not guilty.
But he also faces more than 80 other charges for various crimes, including forgery, drug trafficking, and money laundering.
So you see, money laundering, drug trafficking, and forgery. So it's not even just the murder of his wife and his son. It's all of these other crimes as well. You have to understand, like, this kind of thing does not happen in Low Country, South Carolina. So like this case, like, shocked and wrecked the town. So just keep that in mind.
The South Carolina man's fall from grace as a powerful attorney, disturbingly layered. There's alleged criminal behavior, opioid addiction, and mysterious deaths surrounding his family. Murdaugh's attorneys have previously admitted some financial wrongdoing and drug use.
Look, he's reconciled to the fact he's going to prison.
But today, all eyes on the upcoming murder trial.
Why this particular individual would murder his own wife and son? And the answer is because it allowed him to escape the accountability that was coming upon him that he's never had to deal with in his entire life.
And Sam Brock joins us now from Miami. Sam, one of the key points of this hearing seemed to be about Murdaugh's shirt from the day of the alleged murders. What do we know about that?
Yep.
Yeah, this was an interesting conversation, Gotti. This was the first part of the hearing today where SLED, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Department, had looked at the shirt that Alec Murdaugh was wearing the night of the murders. The analyst they hired to look at it said initially there's no blood spatter on here. Then later decided, yes, there is blood spatter, but is it human blood? That seemed to be an open-ended question. So the defense wanted the communications between this analyst and the state so they could see for themselves exactly what that back and forth was. And oh, by the way, the shirt itself has been destroyed, so it can't be tested again. The judge found in favor of the defense. And Gotti, just to give you some context for this conversation and the importance of this family in South Carolina, as they're having it, we learned there's a portrait of Murdaugh's grandfather in the courtroom that has to be removed before the trial in January.
That's how prominent the family was. There was a picture of his grandfather in the courtroom where the trial was taking place. I believe he killed his son and his wife to protect himself. I really do. I really do. So it's unfortunate. Everything that happened, what happened to the housekeeper, what happened to Mallory, she was only 20 years old, young girl. Very unfortunate. But this is what happens when you have people of that status that have a lot of money. When they have a lot of money, they have a lot of resources. And this is what happens. They've been getting away with stuff like this for years. For years. Look at how the son was just able to walk into the convenience store and just use his brother's ID and get alcohol. I'm pretty sure that wasn't the first time. If Alex Murdaugh and his family members were poor, they would have been in jail. Something to think about. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Seeing this in South Carolina Murdaugh got that look on his face saying, I can't believe this. And I will say, black man, because you know full well he wasn't thinking black man is casting judgment on me. That was probably more of a shock to him. Yeah, I think a big part of the reality check here for him was this is the first time he was actually going to be held accountable. The jury didn't buy it, and that judge didn't buy it. And so I think it was a big wake-up call and reality check for him. I'll go to some of the comments, and then we'll go to the Kshama story here. Eric, can you just get that timestamp on that Kshama video? Thanks. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. Murder is in their very name. Steve W. can see that. Stevie Wonder. Thank you for the super chat as well. Damn, they have a street named after them. Yeah, they pretty much owned the town. That's how wealthy they were. James M. said the housekeeper died on their property. Yes. She fell down the stairs, they said that she tripped over their dogs, and that's how she fell and hit her head. It was on their property. That's right. And thank you for the super chat, Laugh 66. The defendant was showing tears and looking for sympathy repeatedly. If he was innocent, he would not have portrayed himself like this every hour. He almost seemed relieved when he could stop acting. Thank you so much for that. Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Yesterday, if you did not hear, Workers Strike Back launched. So this is a new initiative from Kshama Sawant and those at Socialist Alternative. They decided to start an organization to create a national labor movement across this country. And Kshama came onto this show to talk a little bit about it the day it was announced. So she came on that evening. I want to play a little snippet of what she said there. And then I want to show you videos and pictures from the launch in Seattle, which our comrade Nick at RBN was actually a part of, and he was a speaker there. So I want to go ahead and start off with that clip here. And here we go.
And when I say we, I mean Socialist Alternative. As you know, we are a democratic organization. Our members discussed this, and we collectively decided that it's important for us to launch a national campaign and really a movement. And as we've said, it's Workers Strike Back. And I just wanted to clarify, I don't know, some of the headlines call this a new labor movement. I want to be very clear. We're not here to replace the labor movement. What we are here to do is share our message about a fighting strategy and the need for rank and file members of the union movement and also non-unionized workers, young people who want to fight against the climate catastrophe, to defeat big business, to win Medicare for all. How do we win all this? It is through this kind of strategy, and we want Workers Strike Back to empower working people nationally, including in Seattle. And so that's why we're going to have a launch of Workers Strike Back in many cities across the nation on March 4th. And I really urge everybody to sign the petition if you go to workersstrikeback.org.
Awesome, Kshama. Now okay, so there you go. So she came on that night to talk more about Workers Strike Back. Now, I have to say something before I go to the other clips. I'll go ahead and address your question first, actually, Betsy. Sabby, are you going to cover Marianne's big announcement? It was painful to watch, but the guys that do dissidents made it more tolerable. I am not. And I want to tell you guys why. I already covered the Marianne announcement when it was announced a couple days ago. I know she made her official announcement and she had a speech yesterday. But the reason why I decided not to cover it again is because there were two things that happened yesterday. There was Marianne Williamson's announcement that she's running for president, which I had already discussed that a couple days ago. But there was also the launch of Workers Strike Back. And let me tell you what I saw yesterday. When I looked on YouTube, everybody was covering Marianne Williamson's announcement, which I had already covered it before. And with the exception of CJ, I didn't see anybody else covering the Workers Strike Back launch. Maybe some people will cover it today or tomorrow, but to me, and I told you guys this a while back before, I found it to be a little bit odd that she decided to have the announcement the same day that Workers Strike Back launched. And Workers Strike Back actually had announced this way back before she decided to have her announcement. Could just be a coincidence. But what I feared would happen happened, which was that more people would be covering that instead of covering the Workers Strike Back launch. If you are 100% behind the workers and you're serious about trying to build some type of working movement, I don't understand how this was even overlooked by people. And it's been overlooked by a lot of people who said that they're all about the labor movement. But here is an organization to create a national labor movement across this country. And the day that it is launched, if you were live yesterday and you didn't even mention it, that is very odd to me. Very odd. So I think a lot of you know where my focus is. My focus is on helping the workers. My focus is getting out in these streets. My focus is trying to create some type of organizations where we can help the workers. And so when Kshama Sawant announced Worker Strike Back, I was like, this is perfect because this is not a political party. They're not running candidates. This organization is to mobilize people to work on different actions for labor in this country, which is exactly what we need. Imagine if we had something like this when Chris Smalls was fighting to unionize Amazon. Imagine if there were all these other chapters across the United States in that fight with him if we had Worker Strike Back. Just think about that. So for me, I decided not to cover it today because you guys have already seen like what, 10, 15 other people cover this already from yesterday. I'm like, everybody's already covered it. And I didn't want to play that same speech again. Did not want to play that speech again. So that is why I decided not to cover it. I think you guys know where I stand. I'm not supporting anyone running through the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. I'm not supporting the duopoly. And I think at this point, honestly, I didn't need to cover something that's already been covered like by 15 other people. But I did want to give attention to Worker Strike Back because like I said, not many people, with the exception of CJ, not many people even mentioned it yesterday. So Nick, our comrade Nick from RBN, he actually went to Seattle. So he had the opportunity to meet Kshama Sawant. And I saw this picture and I was like, maybe Nick is taller than I realized. Either Nick is tall or Kshama might be shorter than I realized. But Nick shared this and he said, Kshama Sawant is too powerful. And here's a picture here of Nick and Kshama. And I want to show you what the signs say. This one says, nationalize the railroads under workers' democratic control. Monthly meeting of Workers Strike Back, Monday, April 3rd, 6 p.m. And that's at UW Alder Hall Auditorium. And then Nick has this sign that says, no more sellouts. We need a new party. And I 100% agree because we've seen a lot of movements just get co-opted and they just funnel people right back into the Democratic Party. And we need something different. We need something just for the workers. And that's it. So that's where my focus is. And I think that I was really happy for Nick to be able to go out there to Seattle and meet Kshama. And Nick also gave a speech. And I do want to go ahead and highlight part of that. Let me get that one up really quick first. This isn't the full speech. I think Nick is traveling back. He should be back today. Nick posted part of his speech, but hopefully he's going to have the full speech uploaded to RBN hopefully soon. So let's hear a part of what Nick had to say here.
Did you vote for endless military spending that makes regular profit for Great Young Yvonne? Did you guys vote for that? Hell no! Did you guys vote for the record amount that is going to ICE, DHS, that is going under in the Biden administration, not Donald Trump? He's spending more money on ICE. Did y'all vote for that? No! So, now that we acknowledge that we live in a capitalist dictatorship, how do we approach that? What is the answer? It's time for Workers Strike Back.
Awesome. Awesome. So that's Nick there. I'm hoping to see the rest of the speech so we can see the full speech there. But Kshama Sawant, of course, also gave a speech, and this is actually shared on Worker Strike Back Twitter account. So let me go ahead and cue this up here. And then I'm going to tell you about future launches, and one of them I'll be a part of as well. So let's go ahead and dive in here.
Capitalism relies on a divide and rule strategy in order for a tiny minority at the top to exploit the billions of working people on the planet. They need to divide us in every possible way and disorient us. We cannot let them. Right. As a socialist, I fight for reforms because I think we must fight for every real gain we can for working people because our lives depend on it. But at the same time, we should not have any illusions. As hard as we will need to fight to win any reform under capitalism, all the reforms added up together will not be enough. We need a fundamentally different kind of society, a social society based on solidarity and equality, run by and for working people, not the billionaires. That's right.
So I want to say something here that Kshama mentioned here about reforms. Notice she said we can have reform after reform, but at the end of the day, all the reforms just don't add up to be enough. And this is one of the criticisms I've had as well about reform. Like it just, it's like a drop in the bucket. It doesn't really change the system. And I've seen it not just with political reforms, but I've also seen it in the education system. These reforms on education doesn't really fix the system. It doesn't make things as better as they could be because it's just, again, it's a drop in the bucket. And the systemic issues still exist. Same thing with healthcare. When people say, well, we have healthcare reform, Obamacare was a part of healthcare reform. But I think we can all argue that that doesn't go far enough. We still have a lot of people in this country that still don't have health insurance or they don't have adequate health insurance. So throughout my life, I have seen reforms they're not enough and it doesn't change the system. And so I'm glad that Kshama mentioned that like we've tried this with many reforms. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about Workers Strike Back because I want to show you some of the events that they do have coming up. So yesterday they did launch in Seattle, Philly. They also launched in the Bay Area. That looks like that was in Berkeley. And they launched in Pittsburgh, Durham, North Carolina. And today they launched in Minneapolis. And then this Saturday, if you're in the area, I hope to see you there. I will be at the Boston launch. Now that's going to be Saturday, March 11th from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. I will be a little bit late because I actually have a debate before that afternoon, which is going to be recorded. You guys won't see that until June. Like it's a part of this convention. I'll get into that another time. But so I will be there, but I will be there a little bit late. So I'm excited for that. And then I want to announce the other ones that are coming up as well, in case you're wondering if there's one in your area. Chicago will launch also this Saturday, March 11th. Madison, Wisconsin, Saturday, March 18th. And then there is a special event, April 8th, in Pittsburgh, how to organize in your workplace, Workers Strike Back Pittsburgh. So Eric, can you put the link to this page in the chat so people can follow this page so they'll know about all the different links and also the one for Boston, because there is a sign up sheet for this, as you can imagine. It is probably a good thing to have people sign up. And then also, I want to show you the demands again, just in case people are wondering what the demands are for Workers Strike Back. Our demands. Second, workers need a real raise. 2, good union jobs for all. By the way, under need a real raise, they're asking for, we strongly support the fight for $25 an hour. No more 15. Number 3, fight racism, sexism, and all oppression. Number 4, quality, affordable housing and free health care for all. So I think someone did reach out to me asking me if healthcare was a part of this. Yes, healthcare is a part of this as well. So definitely follow this website. 5, no more sellouts. We need a new party. And I 100% agree. I'm going to read this one really quick. The Democrats and the Republicans both answer to billionaires. That's why working people keep getting screwed. Even so-called progressives in Congress have completely failed to fight against the establishment and offer no solutions. We need a new multiracial working class party that organizes movements and fights unambiguously for our needs. In such a party, all elected leaders would accept only the average worker's wage, like Seattle Council member Kshama Sawant. We would need elected leaders to be fully accountable to our membership and our demands, or else removed. We need a party that consistently opposes war and imperialism. Under capitalism, the bosses call the shots and have dictatorship over our workplaces. We need a fundamentally different kind of society run by and for working people, not the billionaires. And while there are no candidates at this point in time, because like I said, they're not focused on politics per se right now. Right now, they're focused on getting these wins for the workers, with the workers. And I did ask Kshama, I said, eventually down the road, would they ever want to run candidates? He's like, maybe down the road, but that's not where their focus is right now. And even then, those candidates would not be running through the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. So, shout out to Kshama. I'm glad that this has officially launched. If you're here in Boston, I'll see you this Saturday at the Boston launch. I haven't decided if I'm gonna stream that or not, since I'm gonna be getting there late anyway. But I want to go ahead and make sure you have this link as well, so you can always refer back to those demands, because people have been asking, like, what are the demands? The demands are right here on the website. So we need something for the workers. Just time is what it is. I'm sorry. It's just a lot of the wins we've had over the past 2 years have not been done through electoral politics. They've been done among the workers and for the workers. That's where we've been getting those gains. Let me go ahead to some of the comments, and then I'm going to go to the story here about Joe Biden. Thanks for the super chat, Justin B. Why give Marianne any more coverage? That campaign is going nowhere. Not worth covering. Yeah, I mean, for me, like I said, like, this launched yesterday, and with the exception of CJ, everybody else was just talking about Marianne instead. And I'm like, we'd already heard the announcement a couple days ago, and I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know. But thanks so much for that, Justin. And I already said what I had to say, you know, in reference to that campaign. Like I said, she's good on some issues, but I just don't believe in trying to do this progressive strategy through the Democratic Party anymore. And I'm not going to ask you guys to donate money to that either. I'm just not. All right, guys, go ahead and hit your like button if you haven't had a chance to do so. And we're going to go ahead and get into this discussion with Joe Biden. So if you have not heard, DC city councilors have decided to make a change to their crime law. Now, although DC is a district, although this is local, you have to remember that DC does not have statehood. And because DC does not have statehood, people like Joe Biden can kind of jump in and go against legislation that they have, even if they have unanimous support, which from what I read, they did. He can jump in, go against that legislation, even if it means he's siding with the GOP. And that's exactly what happened. Democrats are very upset about it. I kid you not. Let's get into it. Here we go.
US Congress may wade into Washington, D.C.'s laws for the first time in decades after the city's council revised its criminal code to soften penalties. House Republicans trying to roll back the law have gained an unlikely ally as rising crime generates widespread concern.
Republicans found an unlikely ally on Capitol Hill Thursday, President Biden. He says he will sign a GOP-led bill to roll back a D.C. crime bill passed by the city council if it makes it to his desk.
One thing that the president believes in is making sure that the streets in America and communities across the country are safe.
So you see what's happening here, right? You have Joe Biden siding along with the GOP in reference to this crime bill for DC. Even though they had unanimous support, he decided to side with the GOP. So when we go back to that State of the Union address, and we tried to tell you guys then this is all optics, the fact that he brought victims, family members to the State of the Union address that had been killed by the police. I told you guys back then, this is all for show. Pay attention to how politicians vote. Pay attention to how they legislate. Pay attention to their actions, not their words. So he brought victims' family members to the State of the Union address and talked about the problem with policing to get on their side. And then here we are. It's a month later? And he's already siding along with the police state, with the GOP when it comes to legislation. This is Joe Biden overstepping and intervening in local politics. Let's go on.
Includes DC.
He's out of touch.
The D.C. Revised Criminal Code Act softens maximum penalties for violent offenses like carjackings, burglary, and robbery. It eliminates most mandatory sentences and requires more jury trials.
I am totally against our Congress blocking anything that our elected officials are doing.
The city.
Let's see what it does again. I want to pause here because she moved kind of fast. I just want to show it here so you can look at it. The D.C. Revised Criminal Code Act softens maximum penalties for violent offenses, eliminates most mandatory sentences, and requires more jury trials. Let me ask you a question. Isn't everyone in this country supposed to have a right to trial by jury? But you know what ends up happening? Most of the time, those cases don't go to trial. Most people don't have a trial. So, it's worded a certain way. You have a right to a trial by jury, but most people don't even get to have one. So one of the things they're asking for here in this measure is to require more jury trials. What is wrong with that? The other issue eliminates most mandatory sentences. Let's go back to the crime bill, the 1990 crime bills that Joe Biden co-wrote. There were mandatory minimums for drugs. That's why you had people in jail for marijuana for like 20 years because of Joe Biden's crime bills. What's wrong with that? The next one softens maximum penalties for violent offenses. Define violent. Define violent. Because technically, carjacking is defined as violent offense, whether you actually physically hurt someone or not. Keeping people in jail longer in this prison industrial complex that we have in this country has shown not to necessarily curb crime. Because oftentimes when they are released, what happens? They get back into their usual behavior and they end up right back in prison. Because the prison system that we have in this country actually does not rehabilitate the prisoners, even though they call it rehabilitation. That doesn't happen. And if you look at prison systems and you compare it to other countries where they actually do rehabilitate the prisoners, you can see the difference. Look at the prison system in Norway and compare it to the prison system that we have in this country. This is what Joe Biden wanted to go against. He don't even want all of you guys to go to jury trial. Let's go on.
Or jury trials.
I am totally against our Congress blocking anything that our elected officials are doing.
The city's mayor opposed the revision, but she was overruled by the more progressive council. Washington, D.C.'s delegate to the House says she was surprised to learn the president wouldn't veto the measure.
That was the first mistake there, her being surprised by Joe Biden's response. We have to remember who Joe Biden is. Joe Biden is kind of known for being tough on crime. So I'm not sure why she's surprised with his response.
Kind of counting on him.
The bill already passed the House.
Democrat voters, people who align that way, they want safe streets and safe communities too.
Next, it will need to pass the Senate, likely next week.
They want safe streets and safe communities too. But we've already seen, based on the data, having more police does not curb crime. Police aren't trying to save and rescue people that live in poor Black inner city neighborhoods. They're just not. And I can tell you from personal experience, my family's from Baltimore. The police were not trying to show up there to rescue you. By the time the cops showed up, the person who called about a victim, the victim was already dead. They'll show up quickly if you live in a wealthy neighborhood, though. So having more police doesn't actually decrease crime. One way to decrease crime is to fix the poverty issue. The majority of crime is poverty driven, and that's what people have to really understand. So they say that they're trying to decrease the crime issue in this country, but what they're really trying to do is just continue to increase the police state. That's what this is really about. Before you know it, we won't be able to walk outside our doors without seeing a cop on our block.
Expected to gain support from all Republicans and some Democrats.
If anything, we should be increasing penalties for certain offenses, and that's just my view of it.
If Congress does roll back the law, it will be the first time it has done so in more than 30 years.
So that has happened. And it's just, I told you, this is what I've said before. These politicians, they can work with people on the other side, and they call it bipartisanship. But you can't participate in a protest with someone on the other side. You're not allowed to do that. But they can do it. Now, I think this is very key. And for people who seem to not understand who Joe Biden was, give me just a second. I have another clip that I want to show you as well. There was a panel discussion about this, and that includes Simone Sanders. So Simone Sanders, why is this changing on its own? Okay, let me make sure I'm going to the thing. 1 second. Simone Sanders, of all people, they had her on the panel. See, 123. I don't understand what is happening here. Let me move this over. Okay. So yeah, so they had her on the panel, of all people, about this particular issue with Joe Biden doing this about face. You got to hear this to believe it. Listen to this. Now, this was on Meet the Press. So here we go.
It's done. And so we are seeing, at least on policing and crime, I think the president ended up setting out where he thinks his party should be on this issue. But what I'm most interested in is, like, where's the follow-up? Is it just this one-off thing? Is it maybe another event where you have cops behind you? Or does this become something we're going to see regularly to really inoculate not only himself, but the rest of the party from all the defund the police attacks?
Simone, let me start with the Democratic side. How do you think the president handled this issue? And I know you certainly know the ins and outs of D.C. politics as well.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you think he's balanced this and what you made of Muriel Bowser's remarks.
It's interesting that they're asking her because you guys know that she was a part of Biden's campaign, right? Remember, she was a part of Bernie Sanders' campaign and then Biden's campaign.
You know the ins and outs of D.C. politics as well.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you think he's balanced this and what you made of Muriel Bowser's remarks.
So look, on President Biden's side, I think that he himself, it was no shock to me that this is where he landed because of who he is. You have to go all the way back to like 1994 and before when the bill that everyone was called the crime bill, again, police unions helped then Senator Biden, along with then President Clinton, author that bill that did a number of things that Joe Biden would say that his vision of policing in America had never fully been realized. And he was never for defund the police. He's like, I want to fund the police, which doesn't, really square well with some folks with.
Now, what's really interesting here is that Simone Sanders was asked this question about Joe Biden's history with the crime bills when Biden was running for president in 2020. And Simone Sanders actually made excuses for Joe Biden when it came to the crime bill. She was asked, honestly, I would say pretty hardcore questions directly about it. And she was making excuses for it. And here we are today. She was trying to get that press secretary spot for the White House if he won, but that didn't happen. Let's go on.
In the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. I think the staff at the White House should have definitely called the stakeholders. It doesn't make sense to me why there was no communication. You knew where Joe Biden was going to be. This ain't a surprise. From Mayor Bowser's perspective, I think it is, I'm so glad you had her on, Chuck. I think it's very interesting where she's at. She didn't come out and say, this is a thumb in the nose for statehood.
No, she's not.
No, that's
she's
not where she is.
Biden.
No, not at all. But she's just like, look, we could have addressed this. We should have been allowed to address it locally. We don't ever want Congress to interfere, but this is where the conversation needs to go. And I think she is like most mayors, stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Matt, the reason I compare the two.
Well, actually, Mayor Bowser is not like most mayors, because most mayors lead a city that's a part of a state. DC is not a part of a state. DC does not have statehood. So she's not like most mayors. There are certain decisions that she actually cannot make because of the position that DC is actually in. Whereas other mayors can make some of these decisions. That's the difference. Some other mayors can just say, yeah, this is what we're going to do in reference to policing, and that's it. That's a wrap. And they don't have to worry about the president intervening. DC does not have that privilege. It's another reason why I couldn't live in DC. But they don't have it. So I wish someone would have pushed back on that. Like, no, she's not like most mayors. Let's go on.
Because as Mark pointed out, Biden could sort of paper over the divide in his party right now by doing what he did, or at least he's trying to. We'll see what Chicago teaches us. There isn't a person that can do that on the abortion issue on our side.
I think a couple things. I think the problem, though, Biden might inoculate himself, but there is a host of House Democrats. A lot of them are in marginal seats, which are now left to dry. And I'm glad Patty Murray's getting her political cover, but it's a hand-wrapped gift to the NRCC. I think one thing that you think,
by the way, let me pause there. Yeah. You think all those Democrats who are the ones really angry at the president right now because they think, oh, if I knew you were going to, I voted differently. You think this will be a star in some of these ads?
Oh, it should be, and it will be. And I think, look, I've been on the other side of that. I've been when I was at the NRCC when President Trump would do something, and we just walked the plank for you. You know what I mean? I get that. It's not a fun position to be in, and it's hard now because the arguments are tougher to make. You're not making home rule arguments in Utica, New York. But when it comes to abortion, look, I think one thing at least that the Republicans have gotten somewhat used to is, and we've talked about this a lot last year, whatever you think of it, they are willing and more comfortable to go and say, at least as a rebuttal to Democrats, be, look, you are for abortion on demand, abortion for this, that, the other. It's harder to do that and go on offense on this sort of bill for the Democrats when it comes to crime.
Yeah, I do think on the abortion piece, though, I mean, before we were having such a theoretical conversation, right? Like Democrats would say, oh, they want to jail women, and Republicans are like, that is hyperbole. But now you've got in South Carolina the woman who's being charged for taking an abortion pill, and she's being charged with a crime. Like she's going to court. She's on trial.
I don't even think they should even frame abortion as left-right anymore, because there are Democrats who are also anti-choice. And some of them sit in Congress. I think they should stick to the issue at hand, which is the fact that here was Joe Biden deciding to agree with the GOP and intervene with a policy that had unanimous decision from the DC city councilors, as if all of a sudden that fear that they speak of about the right wing doesn't matter anymore. And it's because they have collected interests. And what do I mean by that? There are certain things that they do agree on together. They have no problem being pro-war. They have no problem supporting the military-industrial complex, both parties. They may disagree with certain wars here and there, but they have no problem voting for that bloated $800 billion defense budget. Both parties did that. They have no problem being pro-police. Even some of the ones who said they were for defunding the police. Both parties support giving the police more money. Both parties support corporate donors. Both parties have no problem with that. So these are the things that it's important that we really point these things out. That when it comes to policing, especially for those of you who are abolitionists and those of you who are against the prison industrial complex, when it comes to an issue like that particular issue, both parties support the police state. Period. Doesn't matter if they're a Republican, Democrat, you can't even say the progressives, because the progressives, even the ones that said they were for defund the police when Trump was in office, they oppose it now or they're silent about it now. It's all optics. JB says if they're shocked at Biden or disappointed at Biden, then they weren't paying attention. Or were they, and they're using Biden as a scapegoat to allow decisions like this to happen? Yeah, and so that maybe they can make room for someone else. The majority of Democrat voters don't want Joe Biden to run again. That's just going by the polls. Majority of them don't want to run again. Maybe this is their thing here. Thank you so much for the super sticker. James sends a laugh emoji there. The Oracle says the DC revised criminal code brings the DC code into context with criminal codes of most of the 50 states. Thank you so much for that. And JB says, nope, they push people to accept plea deals even if they're innocent. That's right. Most people do not actually get a jury trial. They don't teach you that in civics, though. They don't teach you that. I took civics when I was in school. It was required. And they'll tell you everyone has a right to a trial by jury, but they don't tell you that most people don't get it. There's that piece. Now, for people who don't remember who Joe Biden was, I played this at the opening. I'm going to play it again because I just want to remind you who he was. Put this here. Pause this. We're going to play a segment of it. And then we're going to do call in because I want to talk about this. This is the topic for call in. And call in will be about a little over an hour because I do have a meeting at 7. Listen to this and we'll go into call in. Let's remember who Joe Biden is.
About crime. Crime is not Democrat or Republican. Making the streets safe is not a Democratic or Republican issue. This is one of those issues I hope this passage of this bill will be taken out of the gridlock.
He warned you back then. They call it making the streets safe. I'm going to rephrase it and say giving the police more money. And he tells you that it's not a Democrat or Republican issue. So there you go. Again, this speech took place in 1993. Let's go on.
Category. And moved into an emerging consensus. And the consensus is as follows, and I will cease when I finish this statement. The consensus is A, we must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to have become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street.
That's who Joe Biden was, and that's who Joe Biden is. This clip never gets old. Never gets old. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric, and then we will head on over to call in. We won't do a break before because I got the time crunch, so I want to make sure that I get in there. Thank you so much for the tip on Rockfin, Jim. You do one hell of a show, Sabby. Here's a 5 spot to help you folks along. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. I try to talk about important things. I feel like this is important. So tonight on Call In, episode 85, can't believe we're almost to 100. Biden backs GOP crime law after DC city councilors pass a crime bill that would eliminate most mandatory sentencing. Biden has intervened with local policymakers to nix the bill, siding along with the GOP. Local Democrat politicians are furious. What are your thoughts? Let me make sure I have this link pinned to the chat, and then we'll go ahead and head on over there. So again, I only have a little bit over an hour for call in because I do have a meeting at 7, and then I got a skadoodle. I don't even say the word skadoozle, scoot. If you haven't had a chance to do so, go ahead and hit that like button, guys. That helps me out with the algo, and I'll go ahead and share this link here in the chat, and I'll pin it to the top of the chat. All right. Replace pinned message. Okay, it's pinned to the top of the chat. Let's head on over to call in. I want to get your opinion about this. I hope more people call out Joe Biden for this decision. So let's get on over to call in. All right, guys, you know how we do this. I am not here tomorrow. I will be back live on Tuesday night, and Margaret Kimberly will join me here. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.